Today I want to talk about the predecessors of the Friends of Los Penasquitos Canyon Preserve. Most people think our Friends group started the fight to save the canyon way back when because we've been around for 40 years now. But that wasn't actually the case. There were people that came before us that started the fight to save the canyon, important people. But I think first, why was it important to save this land here? Why were there so many people invested in it? Why did it become a central focus of the battle between the developers and the environmental movement? And it was the central focus. And that's the fact that it was still an intact 8,000 plus acre Mexican land grant, the very first Mexican land grant in San Diego County. It was called Rancho Santa Maria de los Penasquitos. And it ran from Vista Sereno, what is now Vista Sereno Road in Sereno Valley on the west, Lopez Canyon on the south, to the northern edge of the Del Mar Mesa, and much of Rancho Penasquitos, the southern flanks of Black Mountain Road on the north, and in the east, what is now Sabre Springs. So it was a big piece of land, and it was intact, which is kind of amazing since it had been sold more than 24 times in its history. Its biological diversity is well known. We have over 500 plant species, 170 plus bird species, a tremendous diversity of plants and animals, habitat types. We have vernal pools on the southern and northern mesas, which most of the vernal pools in San Diego County, California, 97% have been destroyed. So the fact that we have a couple of hundred vernal pools on these two mesas made it especially important to save. And they're full of endangered plants and animals. Water, besides the vernal pools, Penasquitos Creek actually has a number of other creeks feeding into it. And in many years, it had year-round water, which was unusual in San Diego back then. But even in dry years, it had stretches that still ran above ground, and it had pools of water. It also had springs. There are several naturally occurring springs in the canyon around the historic ranch house, the Monarchy Adobe, and up in Sabre Springs. Chikorita Creek has a natural spring on it. So we had something very precious to wildlife and to habitats here: water, different types of water. The city of San Diego realized in its general plan update in the 1960s that there was a big problem with all of the communities south of I-8, and that is they had nothing separating them. There were no canyons separating them. There was no open space separating them. So the city of San Diego decided that they should add an open space element to the general plan in the 1960s. And part of the plan was to put aside 3,730 acres of what is now Penasquitos Canyon and save it as open space to separate the future communities of Mira Mesa on the south and Rancho Penasquitos on the north. So that was pretty forward thinking. And generally at the time, the environmental movements accepted the fact that part of the canyon was going to be lost. Half of the canyon of the old rancho would be lost. But they thought the most important parts were being saved, and especially the whole valley bottom. At least that was what people thought, and that was what was in the adopted general plan of the city of San Diego. But this plan didn't sit well with one of the best known developers in Southern California, Irvin. I sometimes mispronounce it Irving, and it's not. It's Irvin Kahn, Kahn. Well-known developer, had bought the Penasquitos in, I think it was about 1962. Yeah, 1962. His plans for the development did not include this 3,700 acres of open space. He didn't like that. He had plans for a 6-lane highway paralleling the canyon. He had plans for golf course. to dam the narrows at close to the West End, to have a country club and homes, a big master plan development. And he had the funding from loans from the Teamsters Pension Union Fund, um, which became important later on. He resisted the city's plan for this much open space, and so a battle opened up, partly between Irvin Khan and the city, and partly between outside groups, environmental groups, who felt the city wasn't um, putting up much of a fight to save this open space element. I can't, in my research, I couldn't pinpoint the exact time that a coalition formed, a loose coalition of the Sierra Club, Citizens Coordinate for Century 3, um, known really as C3, which is still around today. Back then, much more of an activist organization. Today, it's more policy wonks. But back then, in the 60s, late 60s, they were more activists. And a woman named Helen Scantlin emerged from C3 as a leader of a movement to try to save that open space element in the canyon. Uh, One of the earliest fights, open fights, that took place was over the new sewer line that the city of San Diego was putting in at the expense of the taxpayers into Penasquitos Canyon, along the bottom of the canyon, on the south side of the canyon, the most sensitive side, um, the side that tends to get flooded in the wintertime and so forth, to put a 8-mile long sewer line in order to support the future development. Well, this was really the opening salvo in a battle that was to go on for decades. The construction started, C3. It caught people by surprise. There wasn't a lot of forewarning that the actual project was going ahead. Um, but once it started, Helen Scantlin organized several dozen conservationists way back in 1971 on June 2nd to march into Penasquitos Canyon, private property at the time, and to actually try to obstruct the project. They actually got in front of some of the heavy duty machinery at one point, but it was late in the day, according to the superintendent, and so they didn't arrest anybody. He didn't call in the police, and just sent the workers home. Frustrated with the inaction of the city council and the lack of support from the city council for this struggle, Helen Scantlin actually decided to run for the city council. And a guy named Les Braun, who we know, who would later become a president of our Friends group, but this is way before he was involved with the Friends. The Friends didn't exist. Back in the early 70s, he became her campaign manager and ran her campaign for city council. Well, it turned out to be more of an educational campaign, raising the issues, but they lost, and lost badly, which was not a surprise to them. They had no developers bankrolling them the way the other council people did, or the mayor did. Helen later moved out of San Diego because of a relocation of her husband's work. She called me once, many years later, to find out, to say she thought we were doing great, keep up the good work, and wished that she were around. But I think she moved to Hawaii, actually. So Helen left the scene sometime in the, I believe it was in the 70s. But some other folks came along, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit. So with the sewer line a done deal, and it's still a scar on the land to this day, the fight now shifted to a new, more important focus, and that was the immediate challenge of saving the actual open space. What happened is the city of San Diego decided we can't afford to buy this 3,730 acres, and the developer is offering us less than 1,000 acres as a dedication of land. That became pretty typical from the late 70s on, is that developers were expected to dedicate part of their development property for open space, for parks, typically open space parks. Um, so you had the developer resisting this, the city saying, we don't have the money, but the city along the way managed to blow and lose $2 million in bond funds that were available for specifically for the city of San Diego to buy land, and the city blew it. I don't know all the details of it. I've just read about it in summary in some of the old clippings. So the city started floating the idea of reducing the size of the open space. And they started talking about saving half as much land, not 3,730 acres, but something like 1,800 acres. Well, Citizens Coordinate for Century 3, the Sierra Club, and others, Audubon Society said no. There were actually about 24 organizations that listed themselves as supporters of this fight. So they had a good broad coalition of groups for the fight. Meanwhile, while this fight was developing, the county of San Diego moved ahead and bought 193 acres. And that was the parcel of land that includes the historic ranch house. The county's always had a bigger focus on saving cultural resources than open space. The city has had the opposite focus, save more open space than cultural resources. An interesting dichotomy between the two. The county pretty much forced the deal on Irvin Kahn. They paid fair market value, but he gave up some very valuable flat land in the valley. The county also said, we're going to buy an additional 213 acres, again under duress, with Irvin Kahn being under duress around it. Interestingly enough, Supervisor Roger Hedgecock, who would later become famous as a right-wing talk show host in San Diego and a former mayor, at the time was a big supporter of saving Penasquitos Canyon, a big supporter of spending this money to buy the land. It actually totals a little over 400 acres at the east end of what we now call Penasquitos Canyon Preserve, up to from Black Mountain Road just into the old sewer ponds on the west side of the ranch house. Hedgecock was a big supporter of this, and we have pictures of him working with some of the activists who were trying to save the rest of the canyon. So there was good support from him. And there was also support developed from a city councilman named Bill Mitchell. And Bill became well known as a progressive sort as far as the city councilman at the time. Became a supporter of the fight. During this period of time, Irvin Kahn died of a heart attack. At the same time, the funding evaporated because it was Teamster Pension Union funding. A big scandal had developed with the Teamsters Union and the mafia. And that's one of the reasons that the former head of the Teamsters Union body still hasn't been found. But Irvin Kahn was dead, the funding's gone, so he sold, or his successors sold, the holdings of Penasquitos Inc. to another company. The Penasquitos was sold to Genstar Development on November 1st, 1978. Genstar eventually deeded 1,800 acres themselves on February 18th, 1980 to the city of San Diego as open space. Some of the remaining lands came to be made up over 4,000 acres today from other developer exactions and from purchases by the city, the county, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the California Department of Fish and Game, and Caltrans, and one land swap that is another subject matter for another day. During this period of time, some new people were leading the fight to push for saving this land. And that was people like Noah and Nancy Yates. They were new Mira Mesa residents, part of the new community back then. And they were instrumental in forming the Citizens Ad Hoc Committee for Penasquitos Park. This was a subcommittee, and I don't understand all the ins and outs of it, of the Northern Area Park and Recreation Committee. The ad hoc committee was chaired by Nancy Yates, and a couple dozen other organizations signed on to their first petition to the City Council, submitted December 15, 1977. They mounted a multi-year exhaustive campaign on the City Council. Meanwhile, Penasquitos Inc. brought out a conveyance agreement that would set aside only 1,162 acres, including the county-owned acreages. In the May of 1978, the Yates, with strong support from Supervisor Hedgecock and City Councilman Bill Mitchell, organized the first annual Penasquitos Canyon Park Day. That was in May 1978. Some 2,000 people were estimated by the newspapers to have attended the event. Penasquitos Inc. provided some buses, would not let people hike to the canyon. It did provide some buses to take people from the ranch house to the waterfall to show that off. But people were allowed to hike on the county property. Equestrians didn't care. They just rode anywhere they wanted in the canyon. It was a big deal, got a lot of press, and that became an annual tradition for over a decade, park days, and I remember them myself very fondly. Today, the closest thing we had to it would be Ark in the Park, a really nice event that the county puts on for archaeology in the park every year. The Yates, amongst others, pushed for the formation of some committees, oversight committees for the developing open space. One of those became the Citizens Advisory Committee, or the CAC, which was made up of community members representing equestrians and hikers and later bikers, and also representatives from several politicians' offices. Another committee that was set up was a formal committee between the county and the city of San Diego, and that was the Joint Task Force for Penasquitos Canyon, and that eventually evolved into one member from the Board of Supervisors whose district included the preserve, and two members of the City Council, because the way Penasquitos Canyon's always been divided up politically between two City Council districts. So each of those people had a representative, or I should say that City Council person was the representative on the Joint Task Force. The Citizens Advisory Committee was just that. They could only advise. And it was important because it became a focal point of, in the fight over this parcel and that parcel, what's going to be saved? Are we going to save Lopez Ridge from development? Big campaigns. The CAC became the developers had to come to the CAC and make the presentations of their developments. So that was a chance to take a first bite at the apple, so to speak, and get some changes, some modifications. Sometimes the developers did make changes, significant changes. Other times they didn't. The CAC would then make recommendations to the task force, not to the city or the county, but to the Joint Task Force. The task force actually met fairly frequently back then because the pressure was on them from the developers. They had to get their projects past the Joint Task Force to get to the City Council for approval. And so they were anxious to have the Joint Task Force meet. And the reason I emphasize this is that the Joint Task Force no longer meets. And that's because the land is all developed. It's all developed now. So there's no pressure on for them to do anything. The Citizens Advisory Committee still exists. It has been reorganizing itself in recent years when it realized it really had lost its mission. with all the land developed, all it could advise on were day-to-day matters in the preserve. And that relationship is still being worked out between the city, really, and the CAC, which is redefining itself these days. And I think that's about it for now.